A lot of parenting experts out there talk about validating your child's emotions and the importance of honoring and accepting and empathizing with your kids when they are feeling upset or mad or anxious or scared. So, that is what I'm going to talk about today. How can we validate our kids' emotions when they're in a challenging situation or they're really unhappy or mad about something? How can we validate their emotions without necessarily letting our boundaries go? Also, what happens when our kids really refuse or fight the fact that we are trying to talk to them about their feelings and say, I know you're feeling frustrated, or I get that you're really mad, but you can't hit your sister, things like that. So I actually think this is a really important topic. This is kind of like one of the first steps when we're looking at, okay, how do we raise emotionally intelligent kids and how do we honor their emotions? How do we help them to feel and then process and move on from their emotions? Because don't we know, and I think I've said it before, kids are balls of emotion. Like they're just a little fiery, like, oh my gosh, how many 20 times a day probably we have our kids being upset about something or grumpy about something or not happy with it or, asking us for something again and again. So you guys feel me. So that's what I want to talk about today. I actually feel like, and I didn't really mention this in the actual episode, but I actually feel like a lot of the time when we struggle in those initial moments, validating our kids' emotions when they're upset, I actually think a lot of that stems from our own discomfort around seeing or experiencing the emotions with our kids, like the upset or the anger or the frustration or the hurt, the disappointment. Like we have, I think, for so long been kind of like trained out of these emotions. We've learnt maybe as kids that they are bad or they're a sign of weakness or it means we're soft. So imagine then having, I know some of you will have grown up hearing or feeling, sensing some of those messages. It's not okay to feel X, Y, Z, right? So if you think about it, now that we have our own kids, how do we go from that blueprint to the new, this new, this way of being that accepts and allows our kids to have those really uncomfortable emotions? Do you know what I mean? It's almost like we've learned one language for so long and that's become the way we do things and the way we see things. And that's really normal. We don't really show emotions. It's embarrassing, leaving them at the door, come in to work, be productive, suck it up. And no one wants to hear your pity party. Like when we go from that to this space of, whoa, now my kids have these emotions and I know we shouldn't be shoving them down. We shouldn't be suppressing them. I want to help my kids to feel them, to understand them, and to kind of respect them, the emotions, and then move through them and get on with it, using some coping strategies and things. Like there's a mismatch there. There's a gap, right? We've got to like bridge that gap. Anyway, so I digress. In this episode, I'm going to talk about particularly what happens when it kind of feels like it's going wrong, validating your kids' emotions sometimes. And I remember I'll tell you guys a little bit of a story about a parent I worked with, and she said her son really did not like it when she said, whoa, I can see you're really frustrated, XYZ. And he was like, no, I'm not frustrated. You're frustrated. And she was like, oh my God, what do I do? Like, he definitely is frustrated. So I think you guys will love this episode, but I just want to kind of plant in your mind now. We have to, I think, just recognize that we're going from this blueprint A to a blueprint B. Like there's a disconnect there. And that's where kind of the muddy waters are. This is why I think, and one of the chapters in my book, I'm looking down, not that you guys can see me. If you're watching on YouTube, you can, because this is going on my YouTube and on the podcast. In my book, I literally write about the lessons that we have to unlearn. I think that's chapter 1. It's time to unlearn some lessons because we are coming from this framework or this blueprint that is like so deeply in our bones one way. And now we're realizing that's actually not that helpful. Maybe actually sometimes it's been quite damaging. And so we want to do things differently with our kids. Before we begin, I do want to acknowledge the Darug Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I live, work, and record this podcast. I pay my respects to all First Nations people, their elders and ancestors, and I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and stand in solidarity towards a shared future. Okay, Just quickly before we jump into the episode, I do want to let everyone know who is listening. If you're listening to this in July, like at the start of July, when this airs, start of July 2024, in a couple of weeks' time, we have my second annual Chaos to Connection parenting conference, which is coming up very soon. It's launching and starting on the 22nd of July. Goes for 5 days. It's completely online. And my co-host and I, Lara Dawn, we have brought together over 30 experts in their field of child development, parenting, psychology, neurodivergent kids, adults, families, like all of this stuff that I love and I talk about and I speak about. We have brought all these experts together from across the world, and we have recorded sessions that essentially like a cross between an interview and a coaching session, and it's completely free. So what I'm going to do is put the link for that in the show notes. The link is chaos2, the number 2, connectionconference.com. So if you go there, you can get a free ticket. Chaos2 Connection Conference. So 2 is the number 2.com. I'll put that in the show notes. Please go along. If you have loved any of what you have been listening to on this podcast, then you are going to want to get a ticket, because it is all, you're going to be learning all about this stuff in depth, even more from more experts, not just myself, not just Lara Dawn, but like I said, 30 experts. And we would love you to get a free ticket because it runs for 5 days. It is completely online and you can watch those videos, the sessions, at a time that suits you on each day. So everyone gets access to about 5 or 6 sessions that go for about half an hour each day. So there is loads on there. You can pick and choose like a menu, what you want to watch. It is absolutely jam-packed with value, and there's lots of speaker gifts. All the experts are giving gifts away as well, gifts and resources and access to their courses and their coaching. Like, it is wild. So Lara and I are very excited. We would love you guys to come along to the second annual Chaos to Connection Parenting Conference. And if you are listening to this after the fact, then please reach out to my team. If you're listening like beyond the end of July 2024, that is totally fine. Please reach out to us. You guys can find our email address in the show notes. You can reach out to us online anywhere, and we will be able to give you access. Without any further rambling from me, let's get into it. Okay, enjoy. Okay, this is for you if you have a child who, when you try to validate how they're feeling and respond emotionally intelligently, they say, "No, I am not frustrated. That's not it. You're wrong. Don't tell me how to feel." So, I remember working with a particular parent, probably actually over 1 year ago, maybe 2 years ago now. And we were talking about the importance of validating our kids' emotions when they are upset, angry, mad, anxious, all of those, what we would call, I guess, unpleasant emotions. And she described how her son would often react even more when he was frustrated or angry, when she would validate and try to acknowledge how he felt. So we had this whole discussion around it, and I think it's something that's really important for parents to just be aware of. It's not, I don't want to micromanage people's responses to their children when there are big emotions flying around. But if you have a kid who reacts that like hugely when you try to acknowledge and validate how they're feeling, then this video is going to help you. So a couple of reasons why when you might validate or tell your child, "I get that you're feeling so upset, nervous, worried, scared, angry," that they might react and erupt even more. Sometimes it's like adding fuel to the fire. You know that feeling? Sometimes we inadvertently do that and we don't realize, and we don't do it intentionally. We're trying to help our child, but it can just make things worse. So let me tell you a couple of reasons, and I want to give you some examples as well, just to kind of help absorb why this happens with some kids, why it won't happen with every child. So the first thing I want to say is that have a think about when our kids are what I would call emotionally hijacked. I'm sure I've done some other videos on the emotional hijack. Maybe I've done some reels on Instagram or some other videos on YouTube. I know I've written about it as well. So the emotional hijack, even just Google it quickly, because it's that reaction that we have when our emotions take over, right? Our emotional part of our brain, our limbic system, our amygdala senses this threat, right? And we flip into the anger or the even the anxiety, the fear. So when we're emotionally hijacked, remember, our emotions go high, our logic goes low. We can, and kids can essentially kind of switch off that logical part of their brain. So when we try to validate that our kids are frustrated or upset or whatever it is, this can feel really embarrassing or shameful for our kids because they know they're feeling yucky. They don't feel good. It feels yuck. It feels awful. I'm really mad. I don't like this. Like their whole body is dysregulated. We know that they're in low or high level fight or flight, right? So it's uncomfortable. It's stressful. The body is physiologically in a state of stress. It doesn't feel nice. Think about it when you're pissed off about something or you're really upset or you're really, disappointed. They are uncomfortable feelings. It doesn't always feel, it's not always helpful and productive to some when we kind of analyze that feeling and, reflect it back to our child. So it feels yucky. Our kids can feel embarrassed about how they're feeling, or that, they know it's uncomfortable and it's not nice, it's yucky. I can't use that word yucky for the younger kids. It can be irritating when we say, I see you're feeling really upset about this, or I get you're so mad right now. Often some kids will say, no, I'm not mad. And you can see it written all over their face and body. And yet they refute it, right? They refuse, they deny and everything. So as I said before, when we're emotionally hijacked, our logic is kind of going offline. We don't have access to that logical, rational part of our brain where we see reason and things make sense and we can rein in our behavior and things like that. So I want you guys to imagine if your spouse met you, came home after a day at work and you'd had a shocking day, everything had gone wrong, and your boss had given you all this extra work, which was completely unfair, and you were venting about it, and your partner said something like, you must be so frustrated. I can see you're so frustrated about all this work that your boss has given you. You'd be like, what's wrong with you? Like, of course I am. Why are you even saying that? Like, that's so ridiculous. That's unhelpful. You might even feel like it's being a bit psychologist-y. And also maybe a bit fake. I'm not saying that, like, sometimes I like it when, my husband gets it and he reflects that back to me. I'm talking about when we have kids who do not want to hear how they're feeling, even though they're feeling that way. So some ways to flip it. My biggest suggestion or a piece of advice is to get away from the focus on you. You feel, I can see you are. Okay, so we want to focus more on the situation and what's happening and how they're feeling, rather than the person and their emotions and how they're responding or reacting in this moment. So it's a bit of a nuance, right? People in these stressful situations, we don't want to feel like analyzed, right? We want to feel acknowledged. So there's kind of a big takeaway. Our kids want to feel acknowledged and like we get it and like we're on their team, not like they're being analyzed, like this big parent up here to the poor little child who doesn't know how to handle their emotions, right? I often encourage parents to kind of come alongside their child, navigating through that storm of the yuckiness or the anger or the anxiety, whatever it is. Come alongside them, which is not like, oh, I can see you're feeling this way. It's like, ugh, it feels so yucky when blah, blah, blah. So here are some examples. Instead of saying, you look really frustrated, right? Instead of saying that, we could say, not getting a turn of the remote is so frustrating. So I've taken it and kind of shone my light more on the situation rather than the child or the person and their feelings. Another example is, instead of saying, I can see how upsetting this is for you, because I kind of feels like for you this is upsetting. Maybe for someone else they could handle it. So instead of saying, I can see how upsetting this is for you, my child, being called a butthead is so upsetting, hurtful, whatever word, frustrating, angry. Instead of saying, I can see you're so worried about the test, we could flip that to, test can be scary. It's normal to worry about whether you're going to do okay or not. So the test, focusing on that and the situation, and it's normal to worry. It's not, I see you're so worried about the test. My last one is, instead of, you must be so hurt about not getting invited. Instead of that, we could flip it to, it's really hurtful when you feel left out of something. I know, it really sucks being left out. We're trying to focus less on our child and telling them how they feel and mirroring that, because that can just sometimes make things worse, and focusing on the situation and maybe even also what we would feel or what's so normal to feel in that situation. Remember, it feels so validating when someone else goes, you know what, I would feel exactly the same. I don't want to go to work today. Some days I wish I could just quit and still get paid. So it feels so good when someone else goes, I get it. I think I'd feel the same. That sucks. That's not okay. And so on. So I hope that makes sense. People want their feelings acknowledged, not analyzed. Same for adults as for kids, right? So maybe take that focus off the child and that you notice how they're feeling, because sometimes that can blow up in our face and it can make things 10 times worse. And we'll get a, no, I'm not. No, you're mad. I'm not mad. I'm calm. I've had that. We're all human. We're all doing the best we can as parents, but I hope that kind of gives you a little bit of something to think about and something, just another kind of tool up your sleeve in your parenting journey. Hey everyone, me here again. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found that really interesting and insightful, and maybe you can apply some of the things that I spoke about to your kids, no matter if they're toddlers or teenagers, right? So when they're having those challenging moments, at least now you have a few ideas of maybe what to do, maybe what not to do to support yourself and your child in those situations. I just want to remind you guys again, I mentioned it at the start of the podcast today, please get a free ticket to my second annual Chaos to Connection Parenting Conference. It is starting very soon, middle of July 2024. So please don't miss out. 5 days of incredible sessions from expert speakers all around this kind of good stuff that I know you're going to love. So jump on. The link is in the show notes. I would love to see so many of you there. It is honestly, it's such a buzz. It's like the best part of the year. So, all right, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you guys next week.